agency. She has a JD from the University of Richmond Law School and also has a bachelor's from Colorado State University. So welcome back. And then also here to my left is Jason Zeidenberg from the Justice Policy Institute. Jason is the Director of Policy and Research. He is also responsible for strategic and operational responsibilities at JPI. We are very excited Jason is here this evening, and he has stepped in as Jasmine Tyler was not able to make it, and thanks to Jason for being here because he is a national expert on these issues. He's authored at least 24 reports on juvenile and criminal justice issues. He's also worked at DC's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, Multnomah County's Department of Community Justice in Oregon, and he's advised a number of national organizations, including the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, Evidence-Based Associates, the Southern Public Law Center, the NAACP, Washington Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. Jason has a master's in journalism from Columbia University Graduate School and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Toronto, where he hails from. So welcome, Jason. So we want to start by defining some of the key terms that we're going to talk about tonight. That's a great suggestion, just so that we're all sort of on the same page. And we want a little bit of context on some of these issues. So I thought first we'd start with a definition of what mass incarceration is and a little bit of context about incarceration in the U.S. over the past several decades. So I'm going to ask Jason if you can just kick us off with a little bit about what is mass incarceration.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you all for having us together today. It's an important discussion. I'm glad that criminal justice reform and mass incarceration is central to this work. So I left something on the table. Photocopy of an article that appeared in the Hill last week, and I just want to read a segment from it and then maybe get a little bit more into the policy issues. The title of the article is New Policies Potentially Mass Incarceration. Right after I graduated college, something happened to me that has happened to many other Latino men. My brother and I were pulled over by the police in broad daylight. Suddenly, there were 5 police cars surrounding us. My car was turned inside out without reason. The police asked us again and again, what gang are you a member of? What gang are you a member of? I remember it like it was yesterday. This is the reality for many men of color and shows the inherent bias that exists in our justice system. Policies like those reinstated by Attorney General Jeff Sessions last week, which we'll get into in a minute, only serve to double down on this issue that led to the police coming to you that night. So that's an op-ed that's sitting at the back table, which I hope you'll take with you on the way out, written by Congressman Tony Cardenas, who is a congressman of California, is one of the leading reformers in Congress on criminal justice reform. And the reason that he was sort of relating his own personal experience as a college graduate with an engineering degree driving around LA, that was basically his only offense, this was something he authored right after the Attorney General of this country, Jeff Sessions, issued a new memorandum around sentencing. And hopefully we'll get into that a bit. But when he's talking about mass incarceration, I won't put words in the Congressman's mouth, but I interpret it as being just this massive expansion of the criminal justice system over the last 20 to 30 years. This harkens back to a whole bunch of other history in this country that leaves people of color to be under criminal justice surveillance, and in particular, our decision to solve various kinds of problems, including crime, through the criminal justice system rather than through other ways of dealing with the problem. So, mass incarceration to me, if you were asking me to explain to my Canadian relatives, my European relatives, my relatives in Africa, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the fact that the United States incarcerates many, many, many numbers of times more people than any other country in the world. We're the leading incarcerator in the world in terms of population, incarceration rate, and if you drill down on those numbers, this is something that has a disproportionate impact, in some cases an exclusive impact, on communities of color. can say about mass incarceration to me, the key stats that sort of define what the problem is. The fact that we spend $80 billion plus on the criminal justice system, $200 billion if you include all the aspects of the justice system that reach into our lives. And in other countries, and in other parts of the world, we don't see the same level of this justice involvement in our lives. In these other places, we deal with the behavior that leads people to come into contact with the justice system differently. And the key last two things I would say in relation to mass incarceration, you compare crime rates in this country to other countries, they're basically about the same trends, with the exception of one or two crime categories that carry the most of our response. And in other parts of the world, in other parts of this continent, we just find other ways to deal with all sorts of behavior that leads to the justice system, including violence.
Thank you, Jason. So another term that we're going to hear a lot about tonight is the school-to-prison pipeline. Has everybody heard of this term? A lot of people. Okay. So Valerie, can you give us just your definition of school-to-prison pipeline?
So the school-to-prison pipeline, so it is a policies, procedures, and practices that push children out of school and into the juvenile justice system. And when we begin to think of all of the ways that this is happening, we have to look at the overuse of suspension and expulsion. We have to look at the overcriminalization of childlike behavior in schools. We have to look at school divisions just favoring referrals to law enforcement over dealing with issues that children are facing in the school system, and then communities not wrapping around their young people, but rather, again, another area where children are pushed into the juvenile justice system. And so when we stop treating children like children when they are in school and in their communities, and rather begin to push them into the juvenile justice system, that's the school-to-prison pipeline. And unfortunately, in Virginia, we are the #1 referrers in our nation of children to the juvenile justice system.
Wow, we got a lot of work to do. So let's start a little bit with what's happening at the federal level. What are some of the key actions that are being undertaken by the administration, by Congress? What are these threats? And I thought, Jason, maybe you could give us a little bit of context about these threats and what's concerning you the most.
Sure, so I'll talk very briefly about trends and threats. So for the past 20, 30 years, there's been this growing momentum that we need to change the picture I laid out before. The largest prison population in the world, the highest incarceration rate in the world, billions of dollars spent on the justice system, where in other places they deal with these challenges through different means. And that support for change has been bipartisan. We had a number of bipartisan pieces of congressional legislation we put through that focused on everything from reentry, making sure that someone has the services they need when they come out of jail, they come out of prison, attached to treatment, housing, and other services, to changes to sentencing. Okay, we may feel that there needs to be a response to the behavior, but that response does not have to be a mandatory minimum that can lead someone to be in prison for a very long time. So one of the things that happened in the previous administration is the Attorney General had basically said and directed to the federal prosecutors that use some discretion here around the use of the mandatory minimums. And I understand there's some attorneys in the room who can go back and forth about how you would exactly describe it. You can read Attorney General Sessions' memo online. But the way it's read by a lot of people is a directive to prosecutors to basically seek the maximum sentence you can based on the behavior that presents. Now, the challenge, particularly in the federal context, is we are talking about a person that engages in probably more serious behavior than somebody that would engage in behavior at the state level or at the local level. But for us, we see this as a turning point where a message has been sent around how we're going to respond to crime. And we think that what we should be doing is having more individualized focus on the individual that's the most worrying trend. The second most worrying trend, which has nothing to do with Attorney General salaries, is some of the debate going on around the healthcare bill, where basically we had Medicaid expansion in this country. A key part of that was a single individual would have been eligible for Medicaid, which for those of us that are concerned about treatment, that we could expand treatment, particularly for people coming out of prison and jail. That also seems to be in jeopardy in terms of what this administration is doing.
Thanks, Jason. So I have another sort of follow-up question on that. We're hearing a lot about kind of the movement on the Hill in the administration called Blue Lives Matter. And I wondered if you could comment on that and on law enforcement generally in terms of what's happening, the messaging and other things with this administration.
So I'm not an expert on policing, but I will try to address this question in terms of what things coming out of the Justice Department in particular. So a growing number of police departments have been working to actually engage with the community more effectively around de-escalating behaviors. So it doesn't necessarily lead into an arrest, let alone formal justice system process, and that means building relationships with the neighborhoods that people are policing in. There have been lawsuits coming out of the federal government that are focused on helping mediate disputes between police departments in the community. And basically, there's a big push now at DOJ to sort of invalidate some of these. And you have even some police, some cities saying, keep those memorandums in place, keep those processes in place. There's a couple of lawyers who have dealt in more depth. But we certainly have seen a change in the tone, a change in the policy around advancing the kind of policing reforms that have been going on the last few years.
Thanks, Jason. So next I'd like to hear a little bit from you, Valerie, about how you see some of these things potentially impacting your work at the state level. Maybe you can start with what you're doing at the state level and then what you're doing at the intersection of what's happening at the federal level.
So I am here as coordinator of the Rise for Youth Coalition. RISE stands for Reinvesting in Supportive Environments. And that's all about reducing juvenile incarceration and investing in community alternatives, evidence-based community alternatives. And so for us, that means that we shut down, to the greatest degree possible, the school-to-prison pipeline. We don't want young people being pushed out of education and into incarceration. I'm just not saying that, and I don't believe that anyone in the room would think that that is a viable alternative to productivity in a young person's life. And so on the state level, we have been doing our best to work with the Department of Juvenile Justice as it undergoes a transformation. They have taken a look at the juvenile justice system across the nation. And here in Virginia, they've had several studies done by outside organizations and recognize that incarceration isn't the best way. And so they have contracted with 2 organizations to kind of spearhead this whole idea of building a community alternatives, community-based alternatives. And so as these organizations are working across the Commonwealth to build out these community alternatives, they are attempting to put into place all of the supports necessary for young people to be successful in their communities to the greatest degree possible. How many of you have heard of what's called a continuum of care? A few folks? So when we talk about a continuum of care for young people, we're saying that we want to put together all of the supports, all of the resources, all of the programs necessary to support young people to the greatest degree possible in their communities when they have had contact with the juvenile justice system. And so we have 2 organizations now in Virginia, and they have split the state up. And they're looking at all of the different communities and paying close attention to the high committee communities. High committee meaning these are the areas where lots of young people are being referred and placed into the juvenile justice system, and saying what is it that we need to put into place so that young people can be supported from home to the greatest degree possible. But even if they aren't able to stay in their home, that secure care, if it's necessary, that it would still be in the community, so that young people aren't being separated from their support systems. They aren't being separated from their families, but all of those supports and resources that are necessary, that they are placed in those communities, because then not only is the youth helped, but the family is strengthened. And if you strengthen a family, you necessarily then strengthen the community that that family is a part of. And ultimately, that's what we're after. We're after public safety. And that looks like strengthening and supporting and helping young people, families, and communities to be successful. And so that's what we are attempting to do, to come alongside these organizations and to connect them with these communities. Because our organization is made up of several of the organizations that are in the communities and that are able to help. Our organization is made up of families. It's made up of young people. One of the arms of Rise for Youth is called Youth for Rise, and they are youth advocates, and many of them have been in contact with the juvenile justice system, and we are helping them to elevate their own voices and then to become a voice for other young people to say prisons don't work, and if you will support me, if you will help me, not only will I find my own voice, but I'll be able to elevate the voices of my peers, and you can then come into my community and help us to elevate ourselves, help us to support our communities, help us to look at the organizations that are there and helping them even to wrap around us. And so that's the work that we are doing at the state level. And so when I hear the troubling things coming out of the federal, at the federal level, when we hear that the idea that we would want to seek maximum sentences, the idea that we want to crack down on crime and make sure that we are making communities safe without looking at the individuals and the families and the communities themselves and saying, how can we do this without having to look at incarceration as the model, as the only resource? Because incarceration isn't a resource. If we look at what incarceration breeds, first and foremost, recidivism has to come to mind, right? If incarceration were a help, then recidivism would not be so high, especially for young people. Each year that a young person is incarcerated, they become at least 30% more likely to be rearrested, to be entangled even further into the juvenile justice system. But when we begin to look at what happens when a young person is treated in their own community, when they are supported in their own communities, recidivism goes down significantly. Communities become safer because communities begin to support their own. And when resources are poured into a community, then some of the very things that are driving crime, they're eliminated. And so if at the federal level, when they begin to want to make things safer, if they are looking at supporting folks in their communities, that's one thing, but that's not what we're hearing. And so if incarceration is the model, it's not going to yield a benefit, and it's not going to yield the intended outcomes. And so that's what makes it so troubling. And so we are attempting to partner with other states that are recognizing these same trends. Okay, so incarceration isn't working. What it's doing is driving up recidivism. It's breeding young people who then can become entangled in the adult justice system. And so we are all standing together to say, not only do prisons not work, but let's go into communities and help and support and put those supports in place within communities so young people can stay home.
Thank you. And Valerie, can you just give us some stats on Virginia in terms of how much do we spend to lock up a child here in the state versus an alternative to incarceration? Just kind of some context on that.
So to lock a young person up in Virginia for 1 year, it costs over $171,000 for 1 year. Whereas when you start looking at young people in their communities, one of the programming models that is in place currently, but is unfortunately not being used very often, it only costs just over $1,000 a year. So that's community placement. That's a young person that is not even in a residential setting, but in a community receiving supports, and it's just over $1,000. But even when we look at within the community but residential, I actually got the numbers here. I'm not going to have to quote off the top of my So residential programming can cost just over $10,000 in the community. Now, that may sound like a high number, but when you compare that to $171,000, it's pennies on the dollar. And so that's what we're up against. We are spending $171,000. That is 30% of the Department of Juvenile Justice's operating budget is being spent on just over 10% of the young people in their care. 30%.
Thanks, Valerie. And Jason, how does that compare with the rest of the states? You did a recent report called Sticker Shock where you looked at every single state. How does Virginia compare? Are we on the high end, low end, middle?
So I think the key thing is it's all high. So 33 states and the District of Columbia, including the Commonwealth of Virginia, spend $100,000 or more over a year to confine the youth. And as you laid out very clearly, we have a fraction of that to serve 10, 15 people in the community right now.
Wow. So speaking of serving people in the community, I want to ask Elizabeth to give us just a snapshot of the kind of work that you're doing here in the county and some of the things that you've heard about what may be happening at the federal level, whether you feel like that will impact what you're doing at the county level.
Great, thank you. I wanted to acknowledge also that Theo Samus is here, Commonwealth Attorney for Arlington and City of Falls Church, so thanks for coming, along with lots of other friends and family who are here, including some of our team members. So just to come back around and talk a little bit about the work that we do. So we are OAR, which stands for Offender Aid and Restoration, and we work with Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. We work in two primary areas, which is in community service, which is an alternative sentencing model. So some of the things that Valerie's talking about, in lieu of incarceration, we partner with the courts in Arlington and City of Falls Church to have folks go into community service instead of going into incarceration. So we're really excited about that model, and it's cost effective for you as taxpayers here in Arlington, Virginia, and it makes a substantial difference for many of our folks who are going through it. We often hear stories about, from our youth and our adults, that's for youth and adults, we often hear stories about, this is the first time I've ever volunteered in my whole life. And so you're doing community service, giving back to the community, and I think we were at $3.2 million or so of service back into the community, which is huge. So that's incredible for us. We also then work in reentry, and so that model is specifically starting pre-release, so folks who are incarcerated and then who are going to be supported on the day that they come home and then continue on post-release. And so both of those programs, specifically the reentry program, connects with family members because we all rely on our family members for, whatever we need whenever we can get it. So we want to make sure that our folks who are incarcerated connect with their family as well. So in terms of numbers, it costs in the Northern Virginia area, so we're looking at Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, it costs $35,000 to incarcerate a healthy adult in those facilities for 1 year. So that's a healthy adult who is not in need of a lot of additional services. That's $35,000. So if you think about what's going on in your communities and where else can that $35,000 go, I'm sure we can come up with lots of options, including the work that we do at OAR. So on average, for folks who are not in our intensive programming, it's less than $1,000 per person that comes to our door. So our budget is $1.5 million, and we have about 2,400 folks in a given year that come to our door. So we're really excited about this. We've been around since 1974, and we have lots of concerns about what's coming up. And part of it is that we actually don't know what's going to happen because there's not a lot of information out there. But there is this concept from what we're hearing about the tough on crime and kind of the law and order budget is what I've heard that lots of people call it. And we want to be smart on crime. We want people to think about what other options are there before we think of incarceration, and we want people to believe and practice the idea of second chances and fair chances for everyone in the community. We have to ensure that people are able to come home and be successful when they get home, and the easiest way to do that is to not incarcerate people to begin with. So there's lots of research on trauma of incarceration, which we could talk about at any given point, but not just for the actual person who's incarcerated, but think about the families. Also 30%, I think the research value, if you've heard this, let me know, there's a statistic that says that children of incarcerated parents are 70% more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system themselves. So when you're looking at the people who are incarcerated, it's not just that person. You're talking about their families, you're talking about their children, you're talking about their employer who can no longer have them working for them, you're talking about the community who loses out on gifts that that person has. So this is bigger than just that individual.
Thank you. It sounds like you're doing some amazing work here at the county. You mentioned to me when we talked earlier a little bit about some of the data that you've uncovered and a key piece of data about arrests here. I just thought if you could share that with people so we could get some context on how we fit into the rest of the country.
Yes, there's lots of studies out there in terms of incarceration and other elements, but one of the pieces that we talked about for this forum was a new study that has come out recently from the Drug Policy Institute. And so what they did is they looked at the arrest for marijuana possessions in the entire state of Virginia, and they broke it down by county. And so we at Arlington like to be number ones and twos and threes in lots of different areas, but this is one that we don't want to be number 1, 2, or 3 on, and unfortunately we are number 3 in terms of the ratio of incarceration from blacks to whites. So there is a ratio of of arrest for marijuana possession of 8-to-1 ratio. So African Americans and blacks are getting arrested 8 times more than our folks who are white. So the study is lots and lots of information. And they also talked about, so I'll give you just 2 more pieces of data. White, W-Y-T-H-E County in Virginia has 10.9 ratio, so 10.9 to 1. Colonial Heights has an 11.9, so 11.9 black people ratio to 1 for a white person. And then there's Arlington.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. So we've given you a lot of room statistics about the situation here in the state and county. Jason, I know you all did a study a couple of years ago on how much we're spending in Virginia on incarceration on the adult side. I thought you could maybe comment on that to sort of add the last piece, and then we'll talk about some solutions.
Sure. So it's on our website. It's called $1 Billion Divide. It's a report that we put out there in the Commonwealth the year that Virginia's corrections budget crossed the $1 billion divide for the second time in a decade, and it doesn't seem to be going down. But basically, the notion was this is not a good stat for this community. This is not good news. And we tried to put out there some ideas about what we could be doing instead. The biggest push in the report was there's frequent felons who are in the prisons and jails in Virginia for whom their primary challenge is treatment challenge, having mental health, drug treatment, both associated with housing, all people that you're working with on the back end. So if we spent this $1 billion differently, we could spend less of it and more of it in the community. The one community that I worked in that I thought we were getting on top of this issue a bit better, Northern County, which you were referencing before, which is a county that covers Portland, Oregon. There, at the time that I worked there, we were going through a budget crisis, and then we had a budget crisis, and we had no budget was just crashing. When that happens, sometimes you get judges, district attorneys, commonwealth attorneys here, police, probation, parole, treatment providers around the table, and they come up with some workable solutions. And that's an opportunity for folks to come at the justice system from a variety of different angles and say, well, I know what I would like to have happen in this situation now that this behavior has occurred, and it does not have to mean a long prison term. So I think that the challenge for this state, for this Commonwealth, is how are you going to spend the $1 billion you're already spending on this colossus a little differently? Are we going to take on things like the abolition of parole? Are we going to take on the treatment sentencing laws in the state?
So I thought we'd turn to solutions. So some of the things that you all are doing every day to try to reverse this situation for Virginia and Arlington County. Elizabeth, let's start with you. Let's hear what you're doing, what you're working on, and some suggestions you have for this audience about ways they can connect in.
So as I mentioned earlier, we have an alternative sentencing program that we work with, and so we would love to grow that as much as possible. So that means we would love our lawyers, our criminal justice staff members, our attorneys, our judges to sentence more people. If you're going to sentence someone for something, we would love for you all to send them our way for alternative sentencing so that we have less people getting into this mass incarceration system, getting into this prison and jail system. So that is one big thing that we would love the community to support us in. And then secondly, I want to talk about this brand new program that we launched July 2015. It's called the Intensive Reentry Program. And the reason I want to talk about that is because it's an evidence-based model. And we've been piloting this program now since then and have had some really great success with it. So it's specifically targeted for individuals who are medium to high risk of reoffending. It's adults, and right now it's only with men. And so we go into the prison system, both in jails in Arlington and Alexandria, as well as Coffeewood Correctional Center, which is the closest correctional center or prison-like facility here that releases folks to our jurisdiction. So that's in Culpeper. So we travel there as well as other localities, and we visit with individuals once a week to meet with them and talk about their treatment plan and talk about how we can support them in their reentry. We connect with families. We're there the day the gate opens. I think one piece that I've always liked to mention is that some people don't really think about this topic unless they have some sort of reason to do that. And I was telling a story once about a participant that we had that came to the office really tired and exhausted and with 3 big boxes. And we had talked about, let's hear the story. And it turns out that the facility where he was incarcerated, the prison he was incarcerated, basically dropped him off at the closest metro stop with a $25 check and the possessions he had accumulated, which fit into these 3 large boxes. He couldn't carry them on his own, so he had to carry one, walk down, come back for his second one, then carry the next one, come back, and then do that for the third one. And he had to do that for 8 blocks until someone from a bus kind of took pity on him and allowed him to get on the bus to take him to his probation office. So when we heard about that story, the organization decided that cannot be the way we're welcoming our people home. I know that's not the way you welcome people home. So we meet folks at the facilities, we give them a ride home, we work with them, and we make sure they get home, we make sure they get connected to whatever they need to, whatever food is needed, etc. And then we work with them post-release for up to a total of 12 months. So that's in this intensive reentry program. And we've only been able to work with 33 people so far because it is a little bit more intensive resource-wise, energy-wise. It costs about $20,000 per person to put someone through this intensive reentry program. But the success rate is clear. So in Virginia, the governor recently came out saying that the recidivism rate for adults was at about 23% or so. Recidivism just means reincarceration. And that's for everybody, low, medium, and high risk. And that's within a year. For medium to high risk, it's actually 54%. So that means that if you have 10 people who are medium to high risk coming home, at least 5 of them are going back within a year. So this intensive reentry program that we're working with, the IRP program, works with those medium to high risk individuals, and so far we have a 10% recidivism rate, so a 90% success rate. So when we talk about solutions, thank you. So when we talk about solutions, and that's, in community service, for example, we have a 90% success rate of people completing their hours as well. So there are lots of solutions, there's lots of evidence out there on how we can do this and how we can do this better than we have been. And so I'm really excited about looking forward and not just how the community can support us, but really I think another big piece is we need you to talk about this. We need you all to go out into the world and talk about this because, as I mentioned earlier, it's been around since 1974. For those of you who've been in Arlington for a long time, you might not even heard about us. But it's not about OAR. It's about those folks who are coming home. We need the community to be open and able to be supportive so that our folks can be successful. So we have tours that we do twice a month. We'd love to have you all come visit our office, talk to our team members and hear their stories. We of course have a social media presence, so we'd love to have you connect there. And if you know folks who have lots of resources or little resources and are willing to share lots of that with us, we have lots of opportunities, both individually volunteering, but also of course sponsoring lots of these wonderful works that we do. So there's lots of options.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It sounds fantastic, and these are great suggestions. And we'll definitely, as a follow-up to this, we're going to capture what everyone's saying in writing. So if you don't have paper and aren't writing all this down, we'll make sure you get it. So Valerie, tell us a little bit about, so how are you all approaching this? Like in the face of these federal threats, what's happening at the state level? How are you all trying to move forward? What's on your agenda, and where do you see plugging people into your efforts?
So I don't know how many of you know, but one of the two large juvenile prisons here in Virginia is closing. How many of you have heard of Beaumont Juvenile Correctional Center? And how many of you know that it's closing June 30th? We are very excited about that. And so we are, first of all, we're going to have a cookout. We're going to have a cookout to celebrate that closure because we recognize that the Department of Juvenile Justice, as they are undergoing this transformation, they realize that that's just not the place for children. Some of the kids that were housed in that facility were traveling over 200 miles away from home. And you can imagine that that created a huge disconnect from their families and a huge disconnect from their communities. And because Beaumont is also in a pretty isolated area, it's out in the middle of Powhatan, just getting there, when you looked at some of the communities that these young people were coming from, that created its own challenge, just for families to even get to their young person. And then when you looked at the ability to visiting hours, and visiting sometimes being used as a punishment, a young person being told, you can't have visitation because you have violated, and so therefore your family, even though they may have to travel 200 miles to see you, and they're only able to see you once or twice a week, you're not going to have that visitation because of something that has happened within the facility. So, there are just so many layers of disconnect and harm happening in that model. And so for that to be closing, for that facility to be closing, yes, we are going to celebrate. We're going to be right next door at Powhatan State Park on June 24th to celebrate the closure of that large, outdated, and unsuccessful model of incarcerating young people. And then we're also holding some town halls. We're going to be holding a town hall in the Richmond area on June 15th. And that is to have a conversation with communities, and we are inviting the Department of Juvenile Justice, we're inviting the community, their regional service coordinator that's been contracted to provide services in that area. We're inviting them to come and have a conversation with those communities, with those community providers, so that the community understands exactly what that continuum that they are building, what does that mean, and how can they, as providers, support their own community. And when they are putting these services in, they need to hear from the community, they need to hear from these families, they need to hear from the young people, because who better than they would know exactly what they need. And so we'll also be holding one in the Chesapeake area, because how many of you know that the department has also begun to move forward with building another facility, another juvenile corrections facility in Chesapeake? How many of you knew that? Yeah, that kind of made us all kind of take a pause, because while we're understanding that prisons don't work, why would we then want to build another one? And so we're wanting to have that same conversation in that community and all of the surrounding communities, inviting them so that they can have a voice as the department moves forward with attempting to build this proposed facility, so that they can ask, hey, so what are the community resources that we could get behind and build up? What are the supports and resources that can be placed into our communities? So there are some resources. There's the multisystemic therapy, there's multi-dimensional therapy, and there is functional family therapy. Now, all of these therapies are taking into account not just the young person, but their communities and their families. And that is how we are going to be successful, and not just reducing incarceration, but reducing recidivism, reducing crime in and of itself. If we begin to address the causes of those things that are happening within communities that are causing the brokenness. And so we are just inviting you all, please, join us, join the Rise for Youth Coalition. If you have signed up this evening to just hear more, we would really love for you to hear more about us. Follow us on social media, Rise for Youth. We have a Facebook page, Twitter, @Rise for Youth. So please connect with us as we continue to say prisons don't work for young people, and let's invest in communities and in supports instead.
Thanks, Valerie. So Jason, can you tell us a little bit about sort of what some of the solutions are that you propose and ways you think people can plug in on the national level or at the federal level or any other way?
So first of all, is just to engage with some of the organizations that are in the room that talked about their approaches, how they work, and really get into the weeds about, okay, well, where does the funding come from the Commonwealth? Where does it come from the federal government? So that it can be enhanced and expanded. To me, that's one thing. The second thing is, we are seeing an expansion now of the available resources for people who are harmed in their crime, who are victim of crime. And while in pop culture and in the media, you see a certain image of what a crime victim is, very often people coming into the criminal justice system have been harmed in the same way that anyone would feel like they have been a victim of crime. So these lines between who has been harmed, caused harms, they're not clean lines. I think the more that we can have a system that's more focused around the needs of the victim and the whole complete needs of the victim, not just that there's accountability, though we do need that when something bad happens, but also that access to information, service, there's opportunities for restitution if they choose that. I think that would be a whole way to roll it into the system. So along with connecting with the national organizations, we can talk about it later, they're doing the kind of funding work that supports the approaches we put about, but also national organizations fighting to defend the expenditure of victim services. We need to spend that too.
Thanks, Jason. And we also have a resource page that we brought for everybody that lists all of these organizations represented here, along with a number of others that are like the Sentencing Project, where Josh Wagner is, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and other organizations. So if you want to plug in, there's some additional ways to do that. So I want to open up to the audience for questions that you all might have for any of our guests. Questions? Yeah, Teresa.
What kinds of advocacy do you suggest are possible? I mean, or at the state level? I mean, I guess my questions would be, what would be your goals in Arlington for 2017-18, and what are your goals state level?
So I would encourage you to just continue to push the idea, the truth, that prisons don't work for young people. That when we are dealing with a young person, we have to first of all recognize that brains aren't even fully developed yet, right? And so we need to be considering how can we support them. And I had a conversation with someone recently, and that person was sharing with me, you keep talking about rehabilitation, and some of these young people have never learned some of the behaviors that we are the pro-social behaviors. And so we can't rehabilitate, we have to habilitate. have to put into place the supports and the resources that are necessary so that young people can learn the appropriate behaviors and appropriate responses. You were just sharing that oftentimes when we look at who a victim is and who a perpetuator of a crime is, those are blurry lines. And if a young person has been hurt in some way, if they have been a victim, perhaps they are just perpetuating that very cycle that they have lived. And so until we support and until we continue to, first of all, have the conversations and then begin to declare out, we don't want you to put our young people in jail. We want you to wrap around them and support them. We don't want you to strip them away from their families and their supports. We don't want you to somehow believe that isolation is going to somehow breed a pro-social outcome, but rather that we will look at communities, that we will look at families, and we'll support them, and that is the message that we want to continue to send out. And so when you go to our Facebook page, when you go to our website, and you look at the resources that we have there, that you would share those around, that you would come to the events that we have going on, but most of all, that we would all be saying, let's not put our young people in prison. It's never going to yield the result that we're after. It's never going to do that.
So just to sort of piggyback on your question, Teresa, since we have a big election coming up in June and then again in November, Valerie, are there things that you all are thinking about potentially doing in the general election around these issues, or do you feel like your agenda for the 2018 General Assembly session is going to be determined after the election? Like, when do you think the timing of that?
Well, right now we're doing some education. We're just kind of going out and talking to gubernatorial candidates and just sharing with them exactly what our platform is. You know, we recognize that prisons don't work, and we want you to support reinvesting all of the monies that come from the closure of Beaumont into community alternatives. That we are wanting you to support community over confinement. We are wanting you to, no matter. Yes, we want safe neighborhoods, we want communities to be safe, we want people to be safe, but redefining what that looks like, how we achieve that goal. And so as we educate those folks who are coming into office, then of course we will be able to shape what our 2018, what it looks like as we go into General Assembly.
Thank you. Yes?
I also have a question about the schools jail pipeline. Is there data available by jurisdiction or even by school as to and where is that available?
So if you were to go to the VDOE's website, the Virginia Department of Education, you can go to their website and you can see suspension by category, you can see suspension by race, you can break all of that information down and see what is happening, not just in districts, you can look at each school.
We can collaborate on getting that link to you with that information as a follow-up, if that's helpful. Okay, yes?
What is the impact of the prison for profit industry? What's the lobbying impact of that?
For me, again, this is not an area that I have substantive expertise on, but enough that hopefully is helpful. So, private companies, their role in the United States prison system, in the U.S. prison system overall, is still small compared to the large public investment in the justice system. What we know is, and there's a report on our website called Gaming the System, is that these for-profit prison companies do play politically to make investments in certain candidates that tend to support their agenda. And it's been documented how some of those agendas lead to people being in prison for longer periods of time. So I think we need to get these private companies out of the justice system. I just think it's greasing a wheel that we don't need to grease, that will just leave more people that end up being locked up. And certainly this administration has overturned directives around saying we're going to get out of the private prison business. That was something that the last administration sent a directive around, and that was pursued by this administration. So in Virginia, I would be focused on trying to keep the correction system public. Sure, there's people down there that save money by working with us, and more efficiencies, but I just think it's an interest that we don't need in the system already there. And we're creating new in the system, which is on the website of my organization, Justice Policies, to figure things out, who some of these companies are, and how politically active they are, that are being called in the public interest, tracks individual legislators. A group called In the Public Interest tracks donations to individual legislators, including the private prison companies who follow the voting pattern and stuff like that.
Are they in Virginia? Yes.
There is
One.
one. There is one adult prison in Virginia that is private.
Do you know which company?
I can find out with a Google search pretty quickly. Yeah. But there's a lot of, there's other financial connections too, even if you, so there's a lot of other money-making opportunities for facilities, even if they're not private, right? So I'm sure you all at some point heard about how much it costs to make a phone call and how they have these private phone companies. So it's that piece of it as well, which is important, but it's also all these other elements that will allow you to make money off of folks who are trying to just call home and talk to their family members.
There are a couple of campaigns focused on that issue. One's called SENLACE, and they do campaigns around the country on privatization. And then the Center for Media Justice has also done a campaign around the phone calls. But we can include those links in the follow-up to get you connected. Dave?
Yeah, so there was an article, I think, in The Economist last week about sort of the alternatives to putting people in prison. Some things that it highlighted were things like fines, things like drug rehab, people staying in their own homes but maybe volunteering to do like a monitoring service or something. Can you go into a little bit more detail about some of these other options and what you think might be a more effective approach than just locking someone up?
So as it relates to young people, we really need to concentrate our efforts on therapeutic services. We need to make sure that we are teaching them, giving them the tools they need to find a different way to perhaps meet a need or to deal with the issues that they are facing in their lives. And so when I talked about multi-systemic therapy and multi-dimensional foster care and functional family therapy, so what do we do when home may not be the best place for a young person? That multi-dimensional foster care is saying, you know what, we recognize that there are challenges in your home, and so while we need to remove you from there, rather than putting you in prison, let's put you in foster care where the support's necessary to help you deal with whatever issues you are facing, whatever they need, whether substance abuse, whether it is anger management, whether there are other mental health issues that need to be addressed. But whatever the issues are, that in this foster placement, all of the needed supports and resources are put into place to support that young person so that when they are able to return to their community, if that becomes an option, that they have been supported in a family setting so that they have learned in community how to appropriately deal with whatever it is they need to deal with in community. There's also the Youth Advocate Program that we actually have one of those here in Virginia in the Roanoke area. And for the most part, those young people are staying in their homes, but they have undergone an evaluative process to understand what their needs are. And again, those supports are put into place. And what we're learning is that, and this actually came from a report from, that you all did, cost of confinement, let's see, for every dollar spent, these community alternatives are yielding a $13 benefit. So $13 for every dollar. That sounds like a win. You know, and then it also reduces recidivism by 7 to 22% when we are using community alternatives to incarceration. Now, what are some of the other? There is a wonderful report, Beyond Bars. It's on the table in the back, and it covers a host of other resources and programmings that could be used to support young people in their homes or in their communities. And while I may not be able to list them all and what they all may do, what I can tell you is that research and practice is demonstrating that it's working, and that's where we need to be spending our money. Because if we can get a $13 return on each dollar, I just don't see how that's a loss, ever.
One of the things that's wonderful about Arlington and the way that we work with the courts is that for folks who are coming out of incarceration, for example, there's some additional fines, court fines, and lots of, not restitution, but there's other fines associated with it. And if you come out and you're having a struggle to find a job, which unfortunately happens to many of the people who are coming home, one of the great things that Arlington courts and Falls Church City courts does is that we are allowed to do community service in lieu of paying the court costs. And so you're talking about someone who, so I think, and Katie, I think we had a case where someone who had over 1,000 hours of community service, which is, more than $20,000 or so in court fines, and they would never have been able to pay that off with their employment, the situation that they have, that the courts allow them to work hour long. So that is really helpful. So if we could do a lot more of that on the front end, I think that is definitely something that we would love to see.
You had a question?
On the you talked about the closing in Beaumont. How much of this is bipartisan in terms of how much of this is the reform, or it just happened because some bureaucrats were ready to close it and spend money on something else, and now they're building something new? And related to how bipartisan is this, does that? Well, I'm sort of wondering if the administration changes parties, do we start reversing progress?
So it was a complete bipartisan decision to reinvest the monies from the closure of Beaumont. And actually it was bipartisan in the idea of closing it as well. Outside organizations, like I shared earlier, they came in and they did a survey of how we do juvenile justice here in Virginia. And it is incredibly outdated, it is incredibly expensive, and it is not yielding the result that we are seeking. And so everyone agrees with that.
So who are the decision makers? If we want to continue to support this, state delegates?
Absolutely. And so the Department of Juvenile Justice, so if you were to contact your legislators and just share with them exactly what you want to happen, realize that department is answering to the General Assembly. That's where they go to get their money. That's where, when they moved forward with this idea of a new facility in Chesapeake, they had to get bond money to do that. And so they had to go to the General Assembly to get that. So when you communicate with your legislator exactly what you want to see happening with the monies, with our budget, with our monies, and you're saying, I don't want to see you build another prison, then they, of course, are going to have to listen to their constituency. Thanks, Valerie. Jason.
One of the things you guys talked about, how to stop the high rate of recidivism, and also making sure that we understand that victims are also sometimes the people who are being put into prison because they're going through the system. But how do we kind of prevent that, and especially with the lens of how do you make sure our police and our prosecutors and our laws and the local and legislature don't push that, kind of the school to prison pipeline? Like, how do you make sure our first responders they're physically people drive? I don't think nobody goes to the prison and say like, I want to go to prison today, like people are being forced there by other people. How do you make sure that those people are held accountable, those people are following the laws that are in place, and also using sound judgment, and also, there isn't racial disparity like the arrests that you were talking about, especially in Arlington about marijuana arrests. So I know that's not exactly what you guys are focused on, but how do you make sure the people on the grounds who are putting people in prison, especially the police and the prosecutors, how do you hold them accountable?
So the key thing I think is to engage with the former community, including law enforcement, productive conversation about what are we trying to get out of this. The world that I want, as here crime victims, has none of these terrible statistics around racial and ethnic disparities in the justice system. And most people I know who work in law enforcement agree with that at all levels, judges, prosecutors, police. We throw out words and some of our elected officials throw around phrases like "Blue Lives Matter." I think that's a caricature of a conversation that needs to happen between the people that we elected, the people that we've offered authority to enforce the laws, and ultimately our neighborhoods and our communities enforced at some point, at some stage in the justice system. So that to me is the key. I just think that the more meetings that you have, the more oversight there is of all the different county functions where there's criminal justice discussions, for example, why are we doing that? Exactly, how is this a good use of our resources? How is this achieving goals set out in various other parts of the county or the state? I think that's a helpful way to engage.
I agree, and also let's consider the laws that we are allowing to be passed, right? Whenever bills are advanced in the General Assembly, let's understand exactly what they're saying they're going to do. When we are looking at the number of young people that are being pushed into the juvenile justice system out of school, let's look at the legislation that is allowing that to happen, and let's write something different. Let's demand that legislation is written in such a way that it is going to help our young people rather than create opportunities to hurt them. I know that sounds like a very nuanced thing to do, right? But when we limit the amount of time that young people can be put out of school, that is less opportunity for that young people to be out of the classroom, less opportunity for that young person to be doing something other than studying with his peers, right? When we limit the use of suspension and expulsion as a tool for correction in a classroom, let's see, put a child out of the classroom so that they can learn to behave in the classroom. I'm not sure how that's ever going to actually accomplish what it is intended to do, right? And so when we look at the legislation that we are writing, that we are allowing to be passed, let's ensure that it's actually going to help young people rather than create opportunities to push them out.
Can you talk just for a minute about some of the innovative work that you have been doing with Youth for Rise and the police chief in Richmond? Because this could be a really exciting thing to have happen in other communities in Virginia.
So we have been working with our young people to create Know Your Rights trainings. And so we are taking our young people and I work for a law firm, right? So we know the law. And so we are just kind of breaking it down so that young people understand when I interact with a police officer, what should that look like? What are my rights if I'm stopped? And so as we are teaching our young people, then we're going out into the communities in which they live so that they can hold these trainings with their peers and with their families. And then we're taking that information and we're sharing it with the police there in the Richmond area. And ultimately what we are working towards is coming together with the police so that the community and the police can come together and draft what we're calling a community bill of rights. And so that the officers understand, you know what, this is a community that knows what their rights are and they are demanding respect from us. But then also the community is saying, yes, we know our rights, but we respect the officers that are here to protect and serve us. And so we have mutually agreed that we will respect each other, that our interactions will be positive, and that we will hold each other accountable, the community and the officers.
So it's Theo's hand went up, our co attorney.
Thank you, and this is a great forum, so I'm happy to be here tonight. But getting back to the accountability question, I'm the elected Commonwealth's attorney here in Arlington. Every 4 years, I stand for election. I've been on the front lines of the criminal justice system for 30 years. And let me say that as a former board member of OAR, Elizabeth's group does great work, and we work every day in the courts. And I will say that certainly the last thing as prosecutors that we want to do is send a person to jail or to prison. And one of the reasons that drew me here tonight was the term mass incarceration. And it's all the great work that you all are doing. I want to push back a little bit and say that mass incarceration to me and to criminal justice professionals, I think is a term that is used to delegitimize what we do. Because there's not a prosecutor in this country that engages in mass incarceration. Every individual that we prosecute is an individual, is a person with a name, a date of birth, an offense that they're accused of, and we are caused to bring evidence to bear against that individual every single time we go to court. We don't round up people in a mass way and send them off in boxcars to a gulag or a prison. We don't do that. And one of the reasons I wanted to speak tonight was to make sure you folks know, as members of this community, that we don't engage with that in Arlington. But we do hold people accountable because we have to do that. We have laws on the books that we need to enforce. And I will say that my office is, statewide, is probably one of the offices that certifies fewer criminal defendants for the juvenile court. Valerie, you can probably back me up on those statistics. But when a 17-year-old in South Arlington, who's been through the criminal justice system in Arlington from when he was in middle school and got into high school and began, committing crimes, and got into high school and continued to commit crimes, and brutally murdered his father on April 1st of 2015. At 17, we moved to certify him as an adult because the criminal justice system could do no more for that individual. And he pled guilty to first-degree murder and will be sentenced in September of this year. But that was an individual who we prosecuted, and that's what prosecutors do. And getting back to the question about what folks can do about real, meaningful criminal justice reform, talk to your legislators about raising the threshold between petty larceny and grand larceny. In Virginia, it's $200. And, as I say in many of these places I go to, we have a lot of our young people who go to Pentagon City Mall and they commit a felony, they commit a theft. And it's going to almost always be a felony. And I say you can't go to Nordstrom and commit a misdemeanor because you're going to be stealing something over $200. So you want to see meaningful criminal justice reform? Talk to your members of your House of Delegates and your state senators to pass that law that raises the threshold. My office, my association, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys, have been working on that for many, many years. We recently have agreed to waive all jail time for all first-time drug offenders, possession of marijuana offenders in Arlington. No one goes to jail in Arlington County for possession of marijuana, first offense, second offense, third offense. I mean, you have to work really hard to be incarcerated for possession of marijuana. And I think Elizabeth will support us on that. And we regularly use OAR as an alternative to incarceration. But I will also say that there are individuals in the system who, through an intense amount of work in our juvenile courts, in our adult courts, with operations like OAR, and our drug court that I, along with Judge DiMatteo and the courts, have moved into Arlington now as another alternative to incarceration. There are individuals who simply will not abide by our laws. And when you talk about who's incarcerated in Virginia for multiple years of incarceration, it's going to be violent offenders. There are not going to be possession of marijuana, possession of cocaine, possession of LSD in our penitentiaries in Virginia. And I think you will look at the statistics and you'll see that. So I just wanted an opportunity to kind of push back a little bit on some of these and to, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm not trying to hijack the forum here, but I think it's important for us to have an honest conversation about the role of criminal justice and what we're trying to do as a community to keep people safe and to hold individuals accountable. and I applaud you all for, especially Valerie, for coming up from Richmond and being here tonight. And I also have with me my Director of Victim Services, Autumn Jones, and Cassandra Blaisrod, who's also a Victim Services Specialist. So we invite you to come to the courthouse on any Friday to see all the work that we do, how hard we have to work to get people to do their community service and to complete their court costs and to hold folks accountable. But the system does work. And as a person who's been, as I say, on the front lines for 30 years, I have to push back on the idea that it's a broken criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there was a question in the back there.
So just thank you so much to the moderator and to the panel for having this forum and sharing your expertise in these areas. My question was specifically on the reentry focus. I know, Jason, you had mentioned earlier that there are key actions in terms of treatment and housing rehabilitation. I wanted to know how much of a focus is there within the juvenile justice sphere within education and workforce development. Whoever wants to take it back.
Right.
Thank you.
Please, I'm sorry, share the last bit of your question.
Sure. I just wanted to know how much was there a focus on workforce development and education within the juvenile justice sphere?
You know, that is an area that is really being developed even now. So I keep talking about these two organizations that the department has contracted with. So they are called regional service coordinators, and they have looked at the range of services that are necessary for young people to be successful when they, to either keep them out of the system or when they are coming home from involvement. And workforce development is one of those pieces that has been highlighted as incredibly necessary. Because you look at many of these communities that are sending lots of children into the system, and they are financially depressed communities, right? They are economically strapped communities. And if finances are an issue, until we address that issue, we can continue to see those young people tend to come back into the system again, and then it'll become a revolving door. And I'm just going to push back just a teeny bit. You were sharing that it's our violent offenders that are repeating, you know, that going back. And to some degree that may be true, but we also have to recognize that if, when we are talking about the young people, if we put supports in place on the front end, perhaps we can stop them from becoming.
I'm with you.
You know, I mean, we really do need to recognize that young people, they're impressionable, their brains are still developing, and if we put into place the things necessary to keep them from following those same trends, or from learning from someone who may be inside that is a little further along than they have been, you know, we can see them follow a different trajectory. And so, you know, we've really got to invest in communities. We've got to invest in family, because that is where young people learn the pro-social behaviors that we are hoping to see take root.
So I know you asked with you, but I wanted to talk about the adult element. And so some of the research is actually showing that, yes, employment and housing are really important to be successful, but there are antisocial behaviors that are the most critical to address. So folks come home, they can get a job at a fast food restaurant or one of these restaurants, but not a cost of living job, and they're not going to stay there for too long. And so some of the reasons why folks don't stay are also in employment are also some of the reasons why folks are recidivating. So things like antisocial peers and thinking models that maybe you created and have been really successful while you're in incarceration, but they won't be for you when you are home. So the behaviors and things that I've learned. And so there is this element of, we do want to advocate for jobs and housing, which is important, but we need to advocate for treatment programs, not just in the youth element of it, but also in the adults. And treatment programs involve evidence-based models that talk about how are you going to handle this differently. I think another piece that's really helpful when it comes to victims and really to talk about the development of individuals. So when I think of young adults, I'm thinking not just of literally people who are young. I'm thinking about someone who went in really young and they haven't developed their brain enough to do things that most of us are doing up here. So there's this whole concept adverse childhood experiences, ACE, which my team knows I love to talk about this. And it's the idea that, so there's 10 questions you ask the person, and we can send links out obviously later, but it's adverse childhood experiences, ACE. And so there's information out there that says that if you have X number of traumas, your ACE score is gonna be from 0 to 10. And if you have at least 4 or more, your brain stops developing in a certain way. And so you're already talking about, I mean, like literally the size of your brain literally stops growing. And the information in your brain stops processing. So when you're talking about folks who are older, I mean, we are looking at people who, even if they are not categorized under 18, are coming out of incarceration when in at 18, 19, 20, coming out 20 years later, and have to figure out how to learn how to drive, how to learn how to use a cell phone, how to learn how to get on the metro. So there's a lot more, it's not just in the youth element, it's also in the adults who are coming out with a lot of limitations.
I just want to add one last piece. And so when you begin to compound these charges as well, we have to look at what kinds of jobs are these folks going to be able to get. You know, you start talking about drug charges, drug convictions, and we start limiting even their potentiality for education if they need help with it. We start talking about certain kinds of crimes, and again, we're limiting the kinds of jobs that they may be able to get. And so, are we creating an atmosphere? Are we creating the perfect storm for folks to continue to commit crime because they don't see another way? And so, we need to really consider, what are we doing? What are we creating? Are we creating the opportunities for folks coming home? Or even folks who don't go in, if they have convictions, are we creating the opportunities for them to be successful?
So we have a couple more minutes, so I wanted to ask each of our guests just to give some closing remarks, anything you want to respond to that you heard from the discussion, or any last thoughts for the audience. So let's start with you, Jason.
So the name of the group is Indivisible, not Divisible. What I was saying earlier about the Blue Lives Matter echo and maybe some of the reactions to the phrase mass incarceration, to me, what this is taking apart a very complicated thing that comes out of American history and that is part of the economy and actual decisions that have been made by people who are shown up to vote about the kind of criminal justice system that we have. And I think that there is actually some unity that there are some changes that need to happen to that system. When you get into issues about what's the appropriate response to violent behavior, what's the appropriate response to repeat behavior, you know, we are actually tapping into the core issues about what it means to have democracy and what it means to be a community. So it's my belief that we can actually have a safer community and fewer people incarcerated, that there are models out there that can achieve that, and that we can make victims whole. It's not just aspirational. I believe we have to have models in this country to get there. It does require that each of us, coming at it from many different perspectives, including the perspective of people that are most directly impacted by the functioning of the system, it requires us to rise to this level that we can have all things in our head at the same time. So that's very challenging, but I believe that's what's going to find in the system.
I would like to say that I would love for each of you to take the time to go to our website, check out Rights for You, and help us as we continue to say that prisons don't work for kids, and that we want to reinvest all of the monies that come from closures of prisons into community models, into community-based alternatives to incarceration, and that we wrap ourselves so tightly around our young people, around broken families, and around struggling communities, that we foster that success that we want to see, that we start believing in the ability for our young people to rise above their challenges, for families to rise above, and for communities to thrive.
You know, it's interesting. I think it's having a discussion is really helpful, and I appreciate you all being here today. I do know we didn't talk a lot about numbers, There are 2.2 million people who are incarcerated in this country today, and 95% of them are coming home. So the idea is that what's going to happen when folks come home?
How successful, the microphone's not working. Hello? How successful do you want your folks who are coming home back into your communities to be? And so that's really what OER is all about, is the idea that it is a fact that folks are coming home and they're coming back to be your neighbors, your family members, your friends, your coworkers. And so how do we garner that human capital that we're missing out on so that the community becomes whole again and becomes diverse and continues to thrive? And that's what we're really looking at when we welcome individuals back home. So that's what I'm hoping the community will take away as well. That folks are coming home and we need to be there to support them in their success as well.
Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. Please join me in thanking Mark. I'm going to turn it back over to Jason to close us out. And this doesn't work.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We'll have a lot of other events coming up. There's one in June for the whole general meeting. We try to do it every month, and please, if you haven't done this already, follow us on Twitter, join our Facebook closed group, and we'll see you soon. Anything specific?
I guess
Yeah, happy hour tomorrow.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, it's happy hour tomorrow. Let's go enjoy and talk about all the wonderful things we learned. And thank you again. Where are we going?
Lost Dog Cafe. In
Columbia Place.
Yeah.
Lost Time Cafe in Columbia.
At 5 o'clock.
There you go.
Till 7.
Yeah. There you go.
We have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.